She sat in that cold chair, watching the man she loved smirk as he stole her entire life. The judge was one sentence away from leaving her homeless, penniless, and without her children. The gavel was raised. The silence was deafening. Everyone thought it was over. But they didn't know who was on the other end of the phone ringing in the bailiff's pocket. In the next 5 minutes, you're going to hear the true story of how a billionaire's arrogance destroyed him in seconds. This isn't just a divorce hearing. This is the most satisfying revenge you will ever witness. Watch until the end, because the twist will leave you breathless. The air in the Superior Court of Manhattan smelled of stale coffee and expensive cologne, specifically Santal 33. The scent Grant wore like a weapon. Audrey sat with her hands folded in her lap, her knuckles white. She stared straight ahead at the mahogany bench, refusing to look to her left. She knew exactly what she would see if she did Grant, leaning back in his chair, checking his Rolex Submariner, looking bored. To him, this wasn't the end of a 12-year marriage. It was a transaction, a business deal he had already closed. "Mrs. Calloway," Judge Harrison boomed his voice, vibrating with impatience. "We have been over these financial statements 3 times. The court finds your testimony regarding hidden assets unpersuasive." Audrey's lawyer, a weary man named Arthur Penn, with a suit that was 2 sizes too big, stood up slowly. "Your Honor, if I may just present the discrepancy in the Cayman ledgers one more time." "Sit down, Mr. Penn," the judge snapped. "This court does not deal in conspiracy theories. The forensic accounting provided by Mr. Calloway's legal team is exhaustive. It shows clearly that the business Apex Global is currently operating at a deficit, and that the marital assets have been depleted by Mrs. Calloway's erratic spending habits." Audrey felt a scream lodged in her throat. Erratic spending habits. She hadn't bought a new dress in 2 years. She clipped coupons. The spending the judge was referring to was a series of fabricated wire transfers Grant's team had planted. They had painted her as a secret gambler, a woman who burned through the family savings while her hard-working husband tried to keep the lights on. It was a lie, all of it. Grant's lawyer, a shark named Silas Thorne, no, not Thorne. Silas Graves stood up. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Audrey's first car. "Your Honor, my client just wants to move on. He is willing to offer a generous stipend of $1,500 a month for 6 months to help Mrs. Calloway get back on her feet. Considering she has drained the children's college funds, we feel this is more than charitable." $1,500, Audrey whispered, her voice trembling. "Rent in this city is $3,000, and I didn't touch the college funds." He did. He bought the yacht in Nice under a shell company. Order. Judge Harrison slammed the gavel. "One more outburst, Mrs. Calloway, and I will have you removed." Grant finally turned to look at her. He offered a small, sad smile, a performance for the courtroom. "Audrey, please," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Take the deal. It's over." His eyes, however, said something different. They were cold, dead things. "I won," they said. "You are nothing." The judge adjusted his glasses. He picked up the final decree. The room went silent. The stenographer's fingers hovered over her keys. "Based on the evidence presented," Judge Harrison began reading from the paper. "The court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Grant Calloway. Full custody of the minor children is awarded to the father, citing the mother's financial instability. The family home in the Hamptons is awarded to Mr. Calloway. No alimony is awarded due to the pre-nuptial agreement's infidelity clause, which this court upholds based on the evidence of Mrs. Calloway's affair. The affair was another lie, photoshopped emails, and a paid actor who claimed he'd met her at a motel in Jersey. Audrey's world spun. No children, no home. She was going to be on the street. She looked at Arthur, her lawyer. He had his head in his hands. He knew he had failed. He was a cheap lawyer, the only one she could afford after Grant froze her accounts. He was outmatched by Silas Graves and his army of associates. And finally, the judge droned on, regarding the joint stocks in Calloway Industries. Audrey closed her eyes. She thought of her children Leo and Sophie. They were 7 and 5. Grant didn't care about them. He only wanted custody to hurt her to avoid child support and to maintain his image as the perfect family man for his upcoming IPO. She took a breath, preparing for the end. Buzz. It was a soft sound, barely audible. Buzz. Buzz. It wasn't coming from the gallery. It was coming from the front of the room. The bailiff, a stern man named Officer Miller, who hadn't moved a muscle in 3 hours, suddenly stiffened. He reached into his pocket. "Officer Miller," Judge Harrison scolded, looking up. "Turn that off." I can't, Your Honor." Miller said, his face paling as he looked at the caller ID. He looked up at the judge, terror in his eyes. "It's the red line." The room went still. Even Grant frowned. The red line wasn't an official term, but everyone in the legal world of New York knew what it meant. It was the emergency direct line reserved for the governor, the attorney general, or federal intervention. It was never used for divorce hearings. Never. "Answer it," the judge commanded, confused. Miller tapped the screen and held the phone to his ear. "Superior Court Department." 4. Yes, sir. He is." Miller lowered the phone slowly. He looked at Audrey. Not with pity, but with shock. "Your Honor," Miller said, his voice shaking. "You need to stop the ruling. Immediately." "On whose authority?" the judge demanded, his face turning red. "I am the supreme authority in this courtroom." "On the authority of the United States Department of Justice," Miller said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "And Alexander Rothschild?" Grant's smirk vanished. To understand why the name Rothschild made the blood drain from Grant Calloway's face, we have to go back. We have to understand who Grant was before the Italian suits and the Hampton estate. 10 years ago, Grant was nobody. He was a charming, ambitious junior analyst at a mid-tier logistics firm. Audrey was the one with the promise. She was Audrey Bennett, then a brilliant actuary with a mind for patterns and risk assessment. She was the one who caught a major error in her company's books that saved them millions. They met at a coffee shop on 43rd Street. Grant spilled his latte on her blouse. He was apologetic, funny, and incredibly handsome. He asked to pay for dry cleaning. She asked him to dinner instead. It was a whirlwind. He told her he had a vision. He wanted to revolutionize global shipping using AI. He called it Apex Dynamics. But he had no capital. He had no connections. "I believe in you," Audrey had whispered one night in their tiny studio apartment in Queens. She did more than believe. She cashed out her 401k. She took a loan from her father, a retired steelworker named Thomas, who gave her his life savings because he trusted his daughter. Audrey wrote the business plan. Audrey built the initial algorithm that Apex used to predict shipping routes. For the first 3 years, Audrey worked 2 jobs to support them, while Grant played CEO. He was the face. She was the brain. But Grant had a rule. My name goes on the patent, babe. Just for optics. Investors don't like husband and wife teams. They think it's messy. We'll add your name later. Audrey agreed. She trusted him. She was his wife. When Apex finally took off, the money came in floods. They moved from Queens to a penthouse in Tribeca. Then came the Hamptons house. Then came the twins, Leo and Sophie. But as the zeros in their bank account multiplied, Grant changed. The charming man who spilled coffee became cold. He started coming home late. He smelled of perfume that wasn't hers. He began hiding his phone. The real betrayal, however, wasn't the infidelity. It was the erasure. 6 months ago, Audrey walked into the Apex headquarters to surprise Grant for lunch. She found him in the boardroom with a group of investors from the Vanguard Group and a man she recognized from magazines, Silas Graves, the corporate shark. Grant is the sole genius behind the algorithm, Silas was saying. He built it from the ground up. No partners, no baggage. Audrey had opened the door. Excuse me. The room went silent. Grant stood up, his eyes furious. He ushered her into the hallway. What are you doing here? He hissed. You're erasing me, Audrey said, tears stinging her eyes. I wrote that code. My father's money started this company. Your father's money was a loan, Grant sneered. I paid him back with interest. You're a housewife, Audrey. You haven't worked a real day in 5 years. Go home. Go shopping. That night she found the divorce papers on the kitchen counter. But they weren't just divorce papers. They were a declaration of war. Grant had been planning this for years. He had systematically moved assets into offshore accounts in the Cook Islands and Panama. He had fired the original accountant and hired Silas Graves to rewrite history. According to the paperwork, Audrey had never worked for Apex. According to the paperwork, she was a liability. And the worst part, Grant had forged her signature on a post-nuptial agreement 3 years ago. A document she had never seen that waived her rights to the company in exchange for a lump sum she never received. You can't do this, she had screamed at him that night. I already did, Grant replied, calmly pouring himself a scotch. I have the best lawyers in the city. I have Judge Harrison in my pocket. We play golf at the same club. Who do you have? You're nobody, Audrey. He was right. Until the phone rang. Back in the courtroom, the silence was thick enough to choke on. Officer Miller handed the phone to Judge Harrison. The judge looked at the device like it was a bomb. He took it, his hand trembling slightly. This is Judge Harrison, he said, his voice trying to maintain authority, but failing. Audrey watched Grant. He was gripping the edge of the table. The name Rothschild had rattled him. Why, Audrey knew the name, of course. Everyone did. The Rothschild banking dynasty was old money, the kind of money that didn't just buy yachts, it bought countries. But Apex Dynamics dealt in shipping logistics. What did a banking empire care about a divorce case in Manhattan? The judge listened. His face went from red to a chalky white. But, Your Honor, Sir, the ruling is already written, Judge Harrison stammered. We have followed standard procedure. A pause. The voice on the other end was loud enough that Audrey could hear the deep, distorted rumble, though she couldn't make out the words. I understand, the judge said, swallowing hard. Yes, immediately. No, I wasn't aware of the federal investigation. Federal investigation. Grant stood up. Objection! he shouted, losing his cool. "Who is on that phone? This is highly irregular. I demand, sit down and shut up!" Judge Harrison roared at Grant, dropping the phone onto the bench. The sudden aggression shocked everyone. The judge looked terrified. He looked at the bailiff. "Secure the doors. No one leaves. Especially not Mr. Calloway." "What is the meaning of this?" Silas Graves demanded, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "My client is a respected businessman." "Your client," a voice came from the back of the courtroom, "is a thief." The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A woman walked in. She was in her 60s with silver hair, cut into a sharp bob, wearing a cream-colored suit that screamed quiet luxury. She didn't look like a lawyer. She looked like a queen. Behind her walked 4 men in dark suits, carrying briefcases and 2 uniformed U.S. Marshals. Audrey gasped. She recognized the woman. Not personally, but she had seen her face on the cover of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. It was Evelyn Vance. No, not Vance. Evelyn Pierce, the CEO of Sovereign Capital, one of the most powerful investment bankers in the world. And she was holding a file. Evelyn walked right past Grant, ignoring him completely, and stopped in front of Audrey's table. She looked down at Audrey, her eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "Mrs. Calloway," Evelyn said. "My name is Evelyn Pierce. I represent the interests of the Hamilton Trust and the private estate of Mr. Alexander Rothschild." Audrey couldn't speak. She just nodded. Evelyn turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I have here an emergency injunction signed by the Supreme Court of the State of New York, staying these proceedings also immediately." "On what grounds?" Silas Graves sneered, though he looked sweaty. "On the grounds of massive fraud, embezzlement, and—" Evelyn paused, turning to look Grant dead in the eye. "The theft of intellectual property belonging to a protected federal asset." Grant laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "This is ridiculous. Intellectual property, I built Apex, it's my code." Evelyn placed the file on the judge's bench. "Actually, Mr. Calloway, you didn't. You stole the base code. But you didn't just steal it from your wife." Evelyn turned to the courtroom gallery, addressing everyone. 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Calloway sent an email, a desperate email, to an old professor of hers at MIT asking for help to prove she wrote the code. That professor is on the board of my company. He recognized the code structure immediately. Evelyn pointed a manicured finger at Grant. "The algorithm you claim to have invented it utilizes a specific predictive sequence, a sequence that Mrs. Calloway developed. But what you didn't know, Mr. Calloway, because you were too busy spending money you didn't earn, is that the core of that sequence interacts with the swift banking logistics system owned by my client, Mr. Rothschild." Grant blinked. "So it's just logistics." "It's not just logistics," Evelyn said, her voice icy. "By claiming sole ownership of that code and falsifying the patent documents to exclude your wife, you inadvertently claimed ownership of a system that manages classified naval supply chains. You tried to sell Apex to the Chinese conglomerate Red Star last week, didn't you?" Grant's face went gray. That was a private negotiation." "It was treason," Evelyn said simply. "You tried to sell a code written by your wife, which she legally owns, that contains federal security protocols, and in doing so, you brought the full weight of the U.S. government and the Rothschild estate down on your head." Evelyn turned back to Audrey. "Audrey," she said gently, "you are not the defendant here. You are the plaintiff, and we are not just suing for the house. We are suing for everything." The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted from a funeral to a gladiatorial arena. The air conditioning hummed, but sweat was visibly beading on Grant Calloway's forehead. He loosened his tie, a subtle crack in his perfect armor. Silas Graves, however, was not ready to fold. He was a creature of technicalities, a man who had built a career on burying the truth under mountains of paperwork. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "This is preposterous!" Silas barked, pointing a shaking finger at Evelyn Pierce. "You cannot simply barge into a closed family court session with a private army and demand a stay of execution on a judgment that has fundamentally already been made. Mrs. Pierce, you are out of your jurisdiction. This is a domestic matter. The DOJ has no standing here unless charges have been filed, which they haven't." Evelyn Pierce didn't even look at him. She walked slowly to the plaintiff's table, where Grant sat, and placed her leather briefcase down with a heavy thud. She clicked the latches open. The sound was crisp final. "Mr. Graves," Evelyn said, her voice smooth like velvet over steel. "You are operating under the assumption that this is still a divorce hearing. It is not. As of 10 minutes ago, when the federal seizure warrant was signed, this is a crime scene." She pulled out a thick stack of documents bound in red tape. "Judge Harrison," Evelyn addressed the bench, "you were about to rule that Mrs. Calloway was financially irresponsible, citing erratic spending habits that drained the family savings. Is that correct?" The judge wiped his brow with a handkerchief. The evidence presented by Mr. Calloway's team was compelling. Credit card statements, casino withdrawals in Atlantic City. "Fabrications," Evelyn stated. She didn't shout it. She just said it as a fact. She handed a document to the bailiff to pass to the judge. "This is a forensic audit conducted by the Cyber Crimes Division of the FBI, authorized by the Rothschild Estates Security Team. We traced the IP addresses of the online gambling accounts attributed to Audrey Calloway." Audrey held her breath. She remembered the nights she lay awake, wondering how thousands of dollars had vanished from their joint account, only for Grant to show her statements with her name on them. She had thought she was going crazy. She had even gone to a therapist, thinking maybe she was dissociating and spending money she didn't remember. "The IP addresses," Evelyn continued, turning to face Grant, "do not originate from the family home in the Hamptons, nor do they originate from Mrs. Calloway's phone. They originate from a server farm in Cyprus, a server farm paid for by a shell company called Obsidian Logistics." Evelyn pulled another sheet of paper. "And who is the sole signatory of Obsidian Logistics?" "It isn't Audrey Calloway." She held the paper up for the courtroom to see. It was a copy of a bank signature card. "It is Mr. Silas Graves," Evelyn revealed. The courtroom gasped. A collective intake of breath swept through the gallery. Silas Graves froze. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. That is a forgery," Silas stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of purple. "I represent Obsidian as legal counsel, nothing more. Is that so?" Evelyn smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Because according to these wire transfers, Obsidian Logistics received exactly $2.4 million from the Calloway Joint Savings Account over the last 3 years. And from Obsidian, the money didn't go to casinos. It went to a private shipyard in Nice, France." Evelyn walked over to a large easel that Grant's team had used earlier to show charts of Audrey's spending. She ripped the top page off, revealing a blank board. From her folder, she produced a large, high-resolution photograph and taped it to the board. It was a photo of a yacht, a massive, sleek vessel with a black hull and silver trim. "Meet the Lady Avarice," Evelyn announced. "Purchased 6 months ago, registered in the Cayman Islands. owner of record Grant Calloway. Audrey stared at the photo. The yacht was beautiful. It was also worth more than she would make in 10 lifetimes. You told the court Mrs. Calloway spent the money on slot machines, Evelyn said to Grant, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You gaslit your wife into therapy. You convinced the mother of your children that she was mentally unstable, that she was a liability to her own family, all while you were buying a floating palace to sail away with your mistress. I don't have a mistress, Grant shouted, standing up. This is slander. That boat is a corporate asset. It's for client entertainment. Sit down, Mr. Calloway, Judge Harrison yelled. The judge was looking at the FBI audit in his hands shaking violently. He realized now that he had been about to sign a ruling based on perjured evidence. If he had signed that decree, his career would be over. He looked at Grant with pure hatred. If you speak out of turn again, I will have you gagged. Evelyn turned back to Audrey. She placed a hand on Audrey's shoulder. Audrey, she said softly, you didn't spend a dime. In fact, our audit shows that you have been incredibly frugal. You kept the household running on a fraction of the budget, while Grant siphoned off millions. You are not a spendthrift. You are a victim of financial abuse on a massive scale. Audrey felt a tear roll down her cheek. For 2 years, she had carried the shame of being bad with money. She had let Grant scold her for buying brand-name cereal. She had let him take her credit cards away for her own good. It wasn't her. It was never her. But the money is just the beginning, Evelyn said, turning back to the room. The dramatic tension was palpable. You see, stealing from your wife is a civil matter. It's despicable, but it's civil. However, Evelyn signaled to one of the men in suits behind her. He stepped forward and handed her a small black hard drive. Stealing from the United States government, Evelyn said, holding the drive up to the light, is treason. Grant's face lost all color. He sank back into his chair, looking like a man who had just heard the executioner sharpen the axe. Let's talk about the affair, Evelyn said, pivoting the narrative. The reason Judge Harrison was about to deny alimony, the prenup. The infidelity clause in the Calloway prenuptial agreement was ironclad. If either party cheated, they forfeited all claims to the other's assets. Grant had used this as his ace in the hole. His evidence had been damning time-stamped emails between Audrey and a man named Sebastian, hotel receipts from a Motel 6 in Jersey City, and a sworn affidavit from Sebastian himself detailing their illicit weekend. Audrey had screamed until her throat was raw that she didn't know a Sebastian. She had never been to that motel. But the digital trail was there. Grant's tech team had done a thorough job, or so they thought. Evelyn Pierce walked to the witness stand. Your Honor, with the court's indulgence, I would like to call a hostile witness. He is currently waiting in the hallway under the supervision of the U.S. Marshals. Who is it? Judge Harrison asked, his voice weak. Mere Sebastian Cole, Evelyn said. Grant's head snapped up. Silas Graves dropped his pen. The doors opened. A young man, no older than 25, was escorted in. He looked terrified. He was wearing a hoodie and jeans, a stark contrast to the suits in the room. He was practically trembling as he was guided to the stand. Mr. Cole? Evelyn began, leaning against the railing. Do you recognize the woman sitting at that table? She pointed to Audrey. Sebastian looked at Audrey. He looked at her with genuine confusion. No, ma'am. I've never seen her in my life. The courtroom erupted. Order! The judge banged the gavel, but he didn't seem to mean it. He wanted to hear this. But Mr. Cole, Evelyn said, holding up the affidavit. You signed a sworn statement claiming you had a 6-month sexual relationship with Audrey Calloway. You provided intimate details. I was told she wouldn't be there, Sebastian stammered, looking at Silas Graves. Mr. Graves told me it was just a formality. He said it was a paperwork error they needed to fix for a merger. He said the woman knew about it and agreed to it. So you lied. I'm an actor, Sebastian cried out. I was waiting tables. Mr. Graves approached me. He offered me $10,000 to sign some papers and provide a headshot. He said it was a corporate role-play scenario for a legal stress test. I didn't know I was ruining someone's life. Then today, the marshals showed up at my apartment. Evelyn turned to Silas Graves. Subornation of perjury, fraud, conspiracy. Silas didn't speak. He was busy typing furiously on his phone, likely trying to transfer his own assets before they were frozen. The infidelity was a lie, Evelyn declared, calculated to strip Audrey of her alimony. But why? Why go to such lengths to destroy the mother of your children over money? Grant has millions. Why did he need every single cent? Evelyn walked back to the center of the room. Because he doesn't have millions. Not anymore. She looked at Grant. Mr. Calloway is broke. The twist hung in the air. Grant Calloway, the tech mogul. The man in the $5,000 suit. Broke. His company Apex Global, Evelyn explained to the juryless room, has been bleeding cash for 2 years. The expansions were cover-ups for debt. The yacht purchased with a predatory loan. He needed full custody of the children and the house, not because he wanted them, but because the trust funds set up by Audrey's father for the twins were the only liquid assets left. He was going to raid his own children's piggy banks to pay off the Russian loan sharks he borrowed from. Audrey felt sick. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. Her father's legacy. The money meant for Leo and Sophie's education. He was going to steal it all. But he had one ticket out, Evelyn said. The code. Evelyn picked up the black hard drive again. The Apex algorithm, the one Grant claimed he wrote. He was negotiating a sale to Red Star, the Chinese conglomerate, for $200 million. That sale would have cleared his debts and set him up for life. But there was one problem. Evelyn plugged the hard drive into the court's projector system. A screen lowered. Lines of complex code appeared, scrolling rapidly. This is the source code for the Apex logistics engine, Evelyn said. It looks like standard C++ to the untrained eye. But look here. She pointed to a block of text near the bottom of the script. It was a comment section, hidden deep in the architecture. Project Daedalus, author A. Bennett, for my father Thomas, 2014. A. Bennett, Evelyn read. Audrey Bennett, your maiden name. Grant stood up, his face twisted in a snarl. She wrote a few lines of basic script. I built the architecture. That comment proves nothing. Anyone could have typed that in. True, Evelyn conceded. Comments can be forged, but compiled times cannot. She clicked a button. A graph appeared. This code utilizes a polymorphic encryption key. It changes every time it is compiled. It's a fingerprint. And this specific fingerprint? Evelyn paused for effect. It matches the security handshake used by the Hamilton Trust Naval Supply Servers, a system that was designed by a contractor in 2014. Evelyn turned to Audrey. Audrey, did you do freelance work for a defense contractor in 2014? Audrey blinked, the memory surfacing through the fog of trauma. Yes. I did a project for a shell company called Blue Water. They needed a routing algorithm for heavy freight. Blue Water, Evelyn said, is a subsidiary of sovereign capital Mr. Rothschild's firm. You wrote a piece of code so advanced that the US Navy adopted it for their supply chains. And because you wrote it as a work for hire, you retained the intellectual property rights for civilian application. You own the code, Audrey. You always have. Evelyn spun around to face Grant. You tried to sell the US Navy's logistics back end to a foreign power. You didn't just steal from your wife, Grant. You stole from the backbone of American national security. And you did it while claiming it was your own genius. Grant was hyperventilating now. He tugged at his collar. I didn't know, I swear, I just thought it was a shipping route optimizer. Ignorance is not a defense for treason, Evelyn said coldly. And unfortunately for you, the sale to Red Star triggered a flag in the Rothschild cybersecurity network. That's how we found you. That's why I'm here. She looked at the judge. Your Honor, the plaintiff, Audrey Calloway, is the sole legal owner of the intellectual property known as Apex. As such, the valuation of the company belongs to her. The debts, however, belong to Mr. Calloway. The realization hit Grant like a physical blow. If Audrey owned the code, she owned the company's only asset. But since Grant had signed the loans personally to buy the yacht and cover the losses, he owned the debt. He was looking at negative $50 million. This is a nightmare, Grant whispered. He looked at Silas Graves. Fix this, do something. Silas Graves slowly closed his laptop. He stood up, picked up his briefcase, and looked at Grant with disdain. Mr. Calloway, Silas said, his voice void of any loyalty. In light of the revelations regarding your falsified financial statements and the potential treason charges, I must inform you that I am withdrawing as your counsel effective immediately. My firm cannot be associated with this. You can't leave me, Grant screamed, grabbing Silas's arm. Silas shook him off. I advise you not to touch me, and I'll be sending a bill for the outstanding hours. Silas walked out of the courtroom, passing the stunned bailiff. He knew the ship was sinking, and he was the first rat off. Grant was alone. He looked at the judge. Your Honor, Judge Harrison, Bob, we played golf on Sunday. You know me. I'm a good man. Judge Harrison looked at Grant with eyes that were cold and hard. He saw his own reflection in Grant's failure. If he helped him now, he would go down with him. The Department of Justice was watching. Evelyn Pierce was watching. Mr. Calloway, the judge said, his voice booming with performative outrage. Address the court as Your Honor, not Bob. And I suggest you remain silent. You have incriminated yourself enough. The judge turned to Audrey. His demeanor changed instantly. He smiled a sickly, ingratiating smile. Mrs. Calloway, or should I say Ms. Bennett, the court offers its deepest apologies. It appears we were misled by a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Audrey stood up. She felt her legs shaking, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear. It was from adrenaline. She looked at the man she had married. The man who had promised to love her, who had fathered her children, who had spent the last year trying to destroy her. He looked small. He looked pathetic. I want my children, Audrey said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to the back of the room. Of course, the judge said quickly. The previous custody ruling is vacated. Full physical and legal custody is awarded to the mother, effective immediately. And the house, Audrey said. Audrey. Awarded to the mother, the judge said, stamping a paper. And the assets, Audrey continued. All marital assets, including the Apex intellectual property, are awarded to the mother, the judge said. Mr. Calloway will retain his personal debts. Grant let out a sob. It was a broken, ugly sound. Audrey, Please. You can't leave me with nothing. The Russians, if I don't pay them, they'll kill me." Audrey looked at him. She remembered the nights he left her crying in the kitchen. She remembered him telling her she was worthless. She remembered him trying to take Leo and Sophie away from her, knowing he would neglect them. "You should have thought about that before you bet against me," Audrey said. Evelyn Pierce stepped forward. "There is one more thing, Your Honor." She signaled to the U.S. Marshals standing by the door. They stepped forward, handcuffs glinting in the fluorescent light. "The Department of Justice is taking jurisdiction over Mr. Calloway," Evelyn announced. "He is to be remanded into federal custody, pending charges of wire fraud, grand larceny, and violation of the Export Administration regulations." The marshals moved in. Grant tried to back away. No, I'm Grant Calloway. I'm a CEO." They grabbed him. One marshal kicked his legs apart, forcing him against the table where he had sat so arrogantly just an hour ago. They cuffed his hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. "Audrey!" Grant screamed as they hauled him toward the door. "Audrey, tell them we're partners. Tell them I helped you." Audrey watched him being dragged away. She didn't look away. She watched until the doors swung shut, cutting off his screams. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive anymore. It was the silence of a storm that had finally passed. Arthur Penn. Her weary lawyer sat down heavily in his chair. He looked like he had just run a marathon. I think we won, Audrey." Audrey looked at Evelyn Pierce. The powerful woman was packing up her files. Evelyn paused and looked at Audrey. "Why?" Audrey asked. "Why did you come? Why did you help me?" "You don't know me." Evelyn zipped up her bag. She walked over to the railing. "I don't know you," Evelyn said. "But I knew a woman like you once. My mother. She was brilliant and she was destroyed by a man who took credit for her work. I couldn't save her." Evelyn's eyes were steel, but her smile was genuine. "When our system flagged the code and I saw the name A. Bennett hidden in the comments, I looked into you. I saw what was happening, and I decided that today the bad guy wasn't going to win." Evelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. It was thick, heavy cardstock with gold embossing. "Sovereign Capital needs a new chief technology officer," Evelyn said. "Someone who understands the Daedalus algorithm. The pay is substantial. Start whenever you're ready." She placed the card on the table and walked out, her entourage trailing behind her. Audrey stood there, the card glittering under the court lights. She picked it up. "Mrs. Calloway," the judge asked tentatively, "is there anything else?" Audrey looked at the judge. She looked at the empty seat where Grant had been. She looked at the exit. "No, Your Honor," Audrey said, turning her back on the bench. "I'm done here." She walked out of the courtroom. But the story wasn't quite over. Because while the court case was finished, the revenge, the real revenge, was just beginning. 1 year later. The view from the 45th floor of the Sovereign Capitol building in Midtown Manhattan was very different from the view in the cramped courtroom where Audrey's life had almost ended. From here, the city looked like a circuit board, a grid of lights and energy that she now helped control. Audrey Calloway, now officially, Audrey Bennett, again stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, sipping sparkling water. She wore a tailored navy suit that fit her perfectly, a far cry from the worn-out clothes she had worn during the trial. Behind her, the hum of the server room was a comforting white noise. As the new Chief Technology Officer of Sovereign Capital, Audrey oversaw the integration of the Daedalus algorithm, her code, into the global banking infrastructure. The media had dubbed her the Cinderella of Wall Street, a nickname she hated but tolerated because it gave her leverage. Her assistant, a sharp young man named David, knocked on the glass door. "Ms. Bennett, the quarterly projections for the Asian markets are ready, and there is a visitor in the lobby. He says he doesn't have an appointment, but he claims it's urgent, regarding Apex." Audrey frowned. Apex was a dead name. The company had been liquidated, the assets absorbed into Sovereign, and the brand dissolved to distance it from Grant's crimes. "Who is it?" Audrey asked. "He didn't give a name. He just left this." David handed her a small, sealed envelope. Inside was a single playing card, the King of Spades. On the back, written in jagged handwriting, was a number $50. Audrey's blood ran cold. The Russian loan. Grant had mentioned it in the courtroom as he was being dragged away. He had borrowed money from investors to buy the yacht and cover his losses. When Grant went to prison, Audrey assumed those debts died with his credit rating. But in the underworld, debt doesn't die. It inherits. "Send security," Audrey started to say. But then she stopped. If she sent security, they would just come back. They would find her children. They would find her father. This wasn't a corporate dispute. This was a threat to her existence. "No," Audrey said, her voice steadying. "Bring him up to the conference room, the soundproof one, and call Evelyn." 10 minutes later, Audrey walked into the conference room. Sitting at the head of the table was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. He wore a cheap leather jacket that squeaked as he moved. He didn't stand up when she entered. "Mrs. Calloway," the man said. His accent was thick Eastern European. "Ms. Bennett," Audrey corrected, sitting opposite him. She didn't blink. "And you can call me Nikolai," he said, picking at his fingernails with a knife he had pulled from his pocket. "I represent the Vorobev Consortium. Your husband, ex-husband, borrowed $50 million from us. He bought a boat. He gambled. He lost." "Grant is in federal prison," Audrey said calmly. "He has no assets. The court seized everything." "The court seized his assets," Nikolai said, pointing the knife at her. "But the court gave you the company. You own Apex. You own the intellectual property. In our world, the debt follows the asset. You have the code. You have the debt." He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a wiring instruction to an account in Estonia. "You have 48 hours, Nikolai said, "or we start visiting family. The twins go to St. Jude's Elementary. Yes, cute uniforms." A surge of primal rage shot through Audrey. A year ago, she would have cried. She would have begged. But the woman who had survived Grant Calloway's gaslighting and Silas Graves's legal warfare was dead. The woman sitting in this chair controlled the logistics for the United States Navy. The door opened. Evelyn Pierce walked in. She didn't look like a banker today. She looked like a matriarch. She was followed not by security guards, but by two men in plain grey suits who didn't look like they worked for a bank. They looked like they worked for Langley. "Nikolai Volkov," Evelyn said, her voice sounding bored. "Born in St. Petersburg, 1982. Wanted in 3 countries for racketeering. Currently operating a shell company out of Brighton Beach." Nikolai stiffened. He put the knife away. "This is a private business meeting." "This is the headquarters of Sovereign Capital," Evelyn said, taking a seat next to Audrey. "And Ms. Bennett is a protected asset of the Hamilton Trust." "I don't care about your banks," Nikolai spat. "I want my money. The husband signed the contract." Audrey leaned forward. She placed her phone on the table. "Nikolai," Audrey said softly, Do you know what the Daedalus Code actually does? Nikolai frowned. It ships boxes. No, Audrey said. It tracks movement, global movement. Every shipping container, every digital transaction, every satellite handshake in the logistics network. It finds patterns. Audrey tapped her phone screen. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life. It showed a map of the Atlantic Ocean. A series of red dots appeared, tracing a line from a port in Morocco to a port in Newark. That's your shipment, isn't it? Audrey asked. Container number MSC 49201. Manifest says textiles, but my algorithm flagged it 3 minutes ago because the weight distribution doesn't match textiles. It matches the density of automatic weapons. Nikolai's face went pale. You are using my code to smuggle arms, Audrey continued. And because I manage the code now, I see everything. I see the accounts you use to pay the dock workers. I see the bribes you pay to the customs officers. Evelyn smiled. It was a terrifying sight. We have the Port Authority and the FBI on line 1, Nikolai. And we have the freezing order for your personal accounts in Switzerland on line 2. Audrey stood up. She walked over to Nikolai and leaned down, her face inches from his. You threatened my children, she whispered. So here is the deal. The debt is cancelled, considered paid in full as a consulting fee for me not sending this map to Interpol right now. You will walk out of this building, you will dissolve the debt, and you will never say the name Calloway or Bennett again. If you do, I won't just send you to prison. I will bankrupt your entire organization with a single keystroke. Nikolai looked at the screen. He looked at Evelyn's agents. He looked at Audrey. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he wasn't the predator in the room. He stood up slowly. He took the wiring instructions off the table and crumpled them into a ball. Grant Calloway was a fool, Nikolai muttered. He told us you were weak. Grant was wrong about a lot of things, Audrey said. Nikolai left. He walked out of the building and, as verified by Audrey's security team, was on a flight back to Moscow by midnight. The threat was gone. The final visit. 2 months later. Audrey drove her new car, a sensible but luxurious Volvo SUV, up the long grey road to the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville. She didn't have to come. Grant was serving a 12-year sentence for fraud and treason. Silas Graves had been disbarred and was currently facing his own trial for money laundering. The war was over. But she needed to close the book. She sat in the visitation room behind the plexiglass. When Grant walked in, Audrey barely recognized him. The tan was gone. The hair was thinning and grey. He had lost 30 pounds. The arrogance that had defined him was replaced by a nervous twitch in his left eye. He sat down and picked up the phone. He didn't look at her. You look good, he rasped. I am good, Audrey said into the receiver. Leo won the science fair last week. Sophie started piano lessons. Grant flinched. Do they ask about me? Sometimes, Audrey said honestly. I tell them the truth. That you made bad choices. That you're in time out for a long time. Audrey, Grant said, looking up. His eyes were watery. I can fix this. I've been thinking. I have ideas. New ideas. If you could speak to the parole board in a few years. Tell them I helped you with the code. We could be partners again. I made you who you are. Audrey stared at him. Even in here wearing a jumpsuit, he was trying to manipulate her. He still believed he was the architect of her success. You didn't make me Grant, Audrey said firmly. You almost broke me. There's a difference. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single document. She pressed it against the glass. "What is this?" Grant squinted. "It's a name change petition," Audrey said. "For the children. They don't want to be Callaways anymore. They want to be Bennets, like their grandfather." Grant's face crumbled. "You can't do that. That's my legacy." "Your legacy is a federal inmate number," Audrey said. "My father sold his house to pay for your lawyers 5 years ago, remember? You never paid him back. This is the repayment. The Bennett name survives. The Callaway name ends here." She put the paper away. "I'm not going to speak to the parole board, Grant, and I'm not coming back. This is the last time you will ever see me." "Audrey, wait." Grant slammed his hand against the glass. "You can't leave me here. I have nothing. I'm nobody." Audrey stood up. She hung up the phone. As she walked toward the exit, she heard him screaming her name, muffled by the thick glass. She didn't look back. The legacy. Audrey drove straight from the prison to a small house in Queens. It wasn't a mansion. It was a modest 2-story brick house with a well-tended garden. Her father Thomas was sitting on the porch reading a newspaper. He looked up as she approached, his face lighting up. "There's my girl," he said, standing up to hug her. "Hi, Dad." Audrey buried her face in his flannel shirt. It smelled of sawdust and peppermint. "How did it go?" Thomas asked. "It's done," Audrey said. "It's all done." She took his hand and led him to the driveway. "I have something for you." "Audrey." "I told you I don't need a new car," Thomas grumbled. "It's not a car." Audrey smiled. She handed him a thick envelope. Thomas opened it. Inside was a deed. A deed to the old lake house in Vermont that he had been forced to sell 10 years ago to help fund Grant's startup. "I bought it back," Audrey said, "and I renovated the workshop. It's yours, Dad. All of it." Thomas stared at the paper, his hands trembling. Tears welled in his eyes. "Audrey, this is too much. You earned that money." "I earned it with the brain you helped me build," Audrey said, kissing him on the cheek. "And the patience you taught me. We're going up there this weekend. Leo and Sophie are dying to go fishing." Thomas wiped his eyes and smiled. "Well then, we better pack. I have to teach Leo how to cast a line properly. Grant never had the patience for it." "No," Audrey agreed, looking up at the sky where the sun was breaking through the clouds. "He never did." Audrey Bennett didn't just survive. She evolved. She became a fierce advocate for financial literacy for women, funding a non-profit called the Bennett Initiative that provided forensic accounting services to spouses going through high-conflict divorces. She never remarried, but she wasn't lonely. She had her children, her father, and her work. She had Evelyn Pierce, who became her mentor and closest friend. And every now and then, when she sat in the boardroom at Sovereign Capital, dismantling a hostile takeover or optimizing a global trade route, she would touch the small locket around her neck. Inside wasn't a picture of a man. It was a tiny scrap of paper with a line of code. Project Daedalus. Author A. Bennett. Value infinite. She had learned the hard way that her value wasn't determined by a marriage certificate or a bank account. It was determined by what she could create, what she could endure, and what she could protect. Grant Callaway had tried to steal her life. Instead, he had given her the fire to forge a better one. And that was the best revenge of all. What a journey. From the brink of losing everything in a corrupt courtroom to running the financial logistics of the free world. Audrey Bennett's story is a powerful reminder that the truth, like good code, cannot be hidden forever. We often think of assets as houses, cars, or bank accounts. But as Audrey proved, your greatest asset is your mind, your resilience, and the people who truly love you. Grant Calloway thought he could erase Audrey because he viewed her as an accessory to his life. He forgot that she was the operating system. It's a terrifying thought how many people are trapped in marriages where they are being gaslit about their own worth. How many Audreys are out there right now thinking they are bad with money or crazy when really they are just being manipulated? If this story made your blood boil or made you cheer for Audrey's victory, then you know exactly why we tell these stories. We tell them to remind ourselves that sometimes the good guys do win. Sometimes the phone call comes just in time. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, justice, and redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Did you guess the twist about the code? Or did you think Silas Graves was going to get away with it? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. We have a new story coming next week involving a hidden will, a greedy stepmother, and a cat that inherited a mansion. You do not want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, know your worth and check your bank statements. See you next time.